Hello, my muffins, my
Hello
Danish
there.
pastries, my Mexican candy. How's everybody doing tonight on this evening?
Danish pastry.
Yeah, I
I'm
know it's
hungry
like
now.
a Anglo question,
Now I
but
want a piece.
I was kind of just like,
Can
what
I be a
pastries
bear
can I?
claw
A
or a
bear claw?
lobster tail?
That's very, very Bostonian of you.
Yes.
Nico, what kind of pastry would you be?
I mean, I don't know. I'd probably be a donut, to be honest.
A donut? What kind of donut?
Yeah,
Classic donut.
jelly filled, probably
Mm.
lemon. About to say raspberry, but that's not a
I like
fruit.
What the
lemon
hell's
donut.
raspberry?
Getting lemon and raspberry mixed up.
It's the
Ah.
schnozberry.
Raspberry.
Yes.
Oh. All right. So we're starting off the podcast pretty strong, which is really funny because I actually was talking about you
Damn.
earlier, and I said Preet's a cutie patootie, but anywho's, welcome to Kollectiv Friday live show podcast, even though it's live. Today we wanted to talk about disabled revolutionaries and what disability actually is, what disability is in capitalism, what it will look like under communism, how we have internal biases as revolutionaries, how capitalism conditions us to think about our fellow man, woman, or whoever, based off their ability to be productive. But before we do that, we have a new face here. The one and only Nico Doom, who has made their appearance on Re-Ed earlier this week. Yeah, right there next to Cruz. But Nico, you wanna? I'm gonna put you on the spot 100%. You wanna tell us a little bit about yourself, or you want me to just make stuff up?
I mean, you're still welcome to make stuff up, but
Cool.
to know more about me, I'm Nico. I have been a Marxist-Leninist now for probably about 8 years. I'm first generation Irish American. I grew up with the experiences of having an undocumented immigrant father, and I'm very goth, and that's pretty much it.
Now I've heard some whisperings that you're also a clown.
Yes, I'm also a clown.
And I don't mean that as a pejorative. I mean as in they are actually a clown.
Legitimate
Yes.
clown.
They're very talented at what they do. But yeah, Nico is also part of the collective cadre, along with Lumpy and Arya. You've helped us a lot get to where we're at. They work a lot with Arya in terms of our visual components and branding and all that stuff. So happy to have you here. Happy to keep you on board. So thank you.
No problem.
Cool. All right, so I'm just gonna yap, and hopefully we'll pick up some steam. As y'all know, I'm always nervous about these things, even though I don't like to show it. So, disability has always been something that has been very intimate and proximal to my life. Just like I mentioned on the last podcast, I'm first generation to this country, and I grew up with two siblings, both brothers, one older, one younger, and both of them have different quote unquote disabilities. One is, physically disabled, and the other one has what you would say a mental disability. My oldest brother, when he was born, he basically was septic, which means a blood infection. And basically his growth plates in his leg didn't develop. So since he's been a baby, he's had to have limb extension surgeries because his leg doesn't grow by itself. So a very, very exposed medical field very quickly, very extensive surgeries since he was 2 years old. So there's a lot of trauma, in the family based around that. I've seen, what it's like for someone to, have quote unquote, the same mental faculties as we do, but struggle with something that they physically can never really change. I mean, he can walk now, but, he had to go through decades of, like I said, very traumatic, extensive surgeries that would keep him in bed for 6 months at a time. And then my younger brother has cerebral palsy. And that's actually an interesting thing to talk about. We'll get into later. But I also had to confront my own biases with him because most of his quote disability is in the way that he can communicate and the way that he speaks. The muscles in his jaw are very weak, so he slurs a lot. But it wasn't until he got older and he started like texting that I really started to see how much this guy actually had inside that he could communicate. But we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so like for my life, since an early age, like I was exposed to it. And then I went to started working as an aide with people with disabilities, and now I'm a nurse. So like my entire life, I've and then the people I work with here in Kollectiv, have disabilities. And I'm not saying disabilities in quotes to dismiss you guys. I'm saying it because again, disability in terms of capitalism, in terms of socialism, are two different things. But yeah, I'll pass it on to whoever wants to say something next.
Do you want to go, Nico? I can go.
Yeah, we both unmuted at the
It's like,
time.
what is it?
All right, I'll go on. So in a similar vein, when I was younger, I didn't know I had disabilities. Well, I'll get into that, but I did have a cousin who had cerebral palsy that I was really close to. So I was, and my aunt was a nurse, and my sister became a nurse. They all did that. So, like that, I kind of saw what he did. Now he didn't have the communication thing. His is more in his legs and stuff like that. He was able to speak, and but I mean, he was super smart. Like he's a super smart guy, and but he had to, take some time off to do surgeries and stuff like that. So he didn't graduate until closer to 20 and stuff. So, I saw all that, and so I kind of had a knowledge of it, and I remember my aunt even when we were younger because she always struggled. Like she was a nurse, her husband was a teacher, and he ended up having a condition that he had to stop working. Well, working as a teacher, he did some here and there. You know what I mean? But they were always struggling, and like I see my family not so much struggling. I mean, we were middle class. We were solidly middle class. You know what I mean? Not like I had everything in the world, but I was taken care of. But there was times my aunt didn't have money, you know what I mean? And would have to, like, ask my father and stuff, and I would be like, "What's it?" And when as I was a teenager, she explained, like, she's like, "Well," she goes, "When I had Mark," she's like, "He like, a doctor said to me, it's" or it was a doctor or a social worker says to her, like, it's a shame, because you're not poor enough to get all the help you need in the United States, and you're not rich enough to
Mhm.
really do okay with raising a child that has a disability." And that is coming from, the '70s. I don't even know how, 70s and '80s of her raising him, and I don't even know how, like, someone does it today, like, with the way, healthcare costs and stuff, and,
Yeah.
for me, I had learning disabilities that went unchecked. I had ADHD that went unchecked. I mean, they didn't really talk about ADHD in the '80s, so, I was just the hyperactive, you know, child that that
Yeah.
was just annoying or whatever I was. I don't know. But I had a little speech impediment, so they did that, and they missed like I went to speech impediment, and they missed that I had dyslexia. I didn't even get diagnosed with that until I was 2021. Like,
Oh wow.
yeah, it was 1994 when
Yeah.
I got diagnosed with it. So I basically had like I taught myself. Now the disease I have, the disorder that I have is genetic. I would have had it from birth. It would have been in my genes, but it's one of those things that progresses out. So like, every stress I had would, progress it. So when I was 28, I was working in the Cape. I was a waitress and working an office job, and I ended up, getting bit by a tick and not knowing it and having the ring and not having insurance, and another, 2 people had the same thing at
Mm.
my, place of work. So the one that had insurance went, and they said it was ringworm, so I treated it for ringworm. So I went undiagnosed with Lyme disease for 4 years, which now I'm here. Now,
Holy
like,
shit.
that pushed out the Durkheim's, that pushed out, like, all the other stuff that I have wrong with me.
Yeah, for those who either don't have Lyme disease or are in the medical field, Lyme disease can be debilitating and cause all kinds of different
Yeah.
problems for somebody's life.
So, yeah, so I struggled with that because as, the people here know, because they know me, I'm a workaholic. Work always, like, helped my anxiety because I always had anxiety because of all the stuff I had, but, like, I always, like, if I could focus on something, if I could do that, like, because I had undiagnosed ADHD, so I needed something, and my addiction became work. So I, stressed myself out doing that too, like, it's so bad because I understood at a young age, like, I understood, like, what capitalism was doing, like, but
Mhm.
I just fell into that, and I was like, I don't know, the perfect dupe, I guess, for them. But yeah, I mean, so the way that I was working and stuff, and, so I end up just having, like, I would go to jobs and I would leave them, like, every year or something like that. Like, I didn't really have a steady job until my 30s. And then I, worked with a client, so I was moved to the different, sales houses that they went to, with them. But when I found out about the dark rooms, I went to work and I said, "Look, I have this. Can I work from home a couple of days a week?" I'm still working for people in that office. But like, if they're not always there, can I work? And they're like, "Fine." So I worked there. And then they decide to put my job to, like, these three other people who are not even in the office. So I'm like, I'll just work from home all the time, which helped me
Mhm.
greatly. And then they started pressuring me to go back in the office, even though I didn't work for anyone in that office. And I'm like, I can't do that. And I had a procedure that summer. I had already told them I was taking, like, I had to take like 8 weeks off. So I just they like, totally didn't give me my short-term disability. They promised it to me, and then they said, "Oh, we switched companies," and the company, like, Liberty Mutual, I don't like Liberty Mutual at all. Just, I'm putting that name out there. They denied it after it was already approved by the first company when I asked months before to go on this short-term disability. So I don't know. I just was like, "You know what? I'm just gonna go disabled. I can't do this." Like, they want me to start showing up in the office after I get back from this. I'm not gonna be able to do this. Like, I was making
Yeah.
myself
Yeah.
sicker and sicker, and I'm like, I just can't. And so I just told them about a week before my short-term disability was up that, I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
And, um, then going through the disability phase is a whole other thing, but so
All
that's
right.
where I'm at. So
I didn't
What,
know.
what
I didn't know all that. Like, I knew
yeah,
some of it. I don't think I've ever actually like sat
lumpy
down
lore?
and chatted
Mhm.
I don't
about the lumpy lore.
I don't talk all
Hmm.
about it all the time.
Yeah. Hmm. What about you, Nico? How has this capital hellscape been made worse for you by things that may or may not have been in your control?
So I guess I should have included it when I was introducing myself, but I have a unique experience being born disabled. I was born with spina bifida, which is a neural tube disorder that causes a gap in your spine. Um, it also is something that still affects me. I've dealt with intense pain since I was about 10 years old. And then basically because of that reality of knowing that I was always disabled from the get-go, I kind of always struggled with the reality of, even at a young age, being told that you are always going to have limitations. You are not going to be able to go and do everything that everyone else can do. You have to get used to being excluded. And I dealt with that a lot, and it affected my ability to get education. It affected my ability to have friends. I ended up dropping out of both middle school and high school because the school system is not comfortable for anyone with disabilities, especially with me, my spinal injury or my spinal birth defect. I could not like hold more than 15 pounds. So book bags were out of the question. The seats were completely uncomfortable. They would cause like literally sitting in a seat would cause my discs to herniate in my spine. So yeah, I was basically treated as something that was easily thrown away my whole entire life because of my disability. And because of that, it's one of the things that helped revolutionize me, because I was always someone who was aware that I was never going to be someone who could make it big. I was never going to, I would always have to rely on someone to hopefully be able to have insurance, be able to have income. I never was able to qualify for disability because of the fact that, I couldn't afford to go to a doctor because, mentioned before, I had an undocumented immigrant father, and then I had a mom who basically functioned as a single mom, making like $300 every 2 weeks. So there was no going to the doctor.
Yeah.
So I realized that my life was fundamentally going to be different from the very get-go. Like it was always going to be that way, and I didn't understand why. That was always my question. Like, why does it have to be different for me just because I was born a certain way? And yeah, so because of that, I started really focusing in on what disability means. Why, there's a difference between things like impairment and disability. And, how society sees disability, because we follow the medical model, which medical model makes disability a personal thing. It is the focus of the person who has the impairment. Whereas like, me personally and other disability communities and a lot of Marxists follow the social model of disability, which sees what is actually the disabling part of disability or impairment is the barriers that society puts up, that capitalism puts up.
Right.
Yeah.
And that has really like fundamentally like shaped how I think.
Exactly. And I want to say a few things, and then I'll pass it to you, Cruz, about if you have anything you want to say.
Yep.
So for me, I think my situation was a bit unique because, like, I had the siblings' disabilities, but because I had these siblings, the way I was raised, my father particularly put the emphasis on me that I was the normal one, that I was the one who had to make it. I have to secure my future so I can take care of them, particularly my younger brother, which I don't, on a moral level, I don't really have an issue with that. But the issue I started to find growing up was, why is it on me to do this when society should be set up to take care of these people anyway and enable them to be able to live as much of a normal life as possible? Like, it shouldn't, that's a lot of a burden. It's a huge burden to put on a child, to instill in them, like, remember, like, your choices, your actions affect more than just you. It affects your brothers, and kids aren't really like equipped to deal with that or reconcile that or really process it. It affected my family relationships for sure. Like, I have a very distant relationship with my younger brother, not so much for any personal reasons, but because it was instilled in me that, like, you have to protect him. You have to, make sure that, like, he's okay at all times. So, like, I remember when I look back. Well, let me say this, and then I'll circle back. So, like, for me, I didn't realize, because of my unique situation, the disabilities that I actually do have. Kind of similar to you, Lumpy. Like, I didn't know I had dyslexia for most of my life, and it really only started. It manifests when I was younger, for sure. But I think the school system just assumed that because I was an immigrant or from immigrant parents that I just didn't speak English well, and I couldn't write well. But, like, now I think about it, the way I type, the way I write, I'm like, oh no, I'm dyslexic. Like there's just word. Like, it's a funny story, but it's a perfect example. I was in the store once with my girlfriend at the time, and I remember I saw like a seasoning packet, and I looked at it, and it said on the packet, it said secret taco. So I was like, secret taco, and then I blinked, and then it said street taco, and she was like, no, dude, it says street taco, and I'm like, oh. But that's the thing with dyslexia, is like, you're literally, the way your brain is wired is like words will
Yeah.
literally change from when you first look at it versus when you look at it again. It's bananas. But for me,
I love the idea of a secret taco.
Yeah, no, I know. That's why I got so excited. But for me, like, you know, when I was in my younger 20s, I got diagnosed with bipolar, which I go back and forth whether or not that was the actual problems I was having, but that's a whole other story. And I definitely have OCD. Mostly manifests in like tics and like obsessive thinking. Like I'll get one idea sort of stuck in my head and it would just keep going and keep going and keep going. But I never knew that was the case because no one in my school system especially like noticed enough or maybe didn't care enough, but also because me and my brothers were all around the same age, like I was known like, oh, he's those kids' brother. So like he's already dealing with them. Like he, you know, whatever emotional issues or struggles he has, it's probably because of his home life. It's not because of his own issues that he's having. But now as an adult, I'm like, no, for sure. There's something there. I also I wouldn't be surprised really if I'm a little bit on the spectrum. And I was talking to you, Nico, about this because I didn't start to think about it until I started noticing as I lived my own life, like things that I was doing that particularly when it comes to sensory issues, like if you've been watching the podcast since from the beginning, at some point I started wearing sunglasses, which started as a joke, but like because I one of the things I would always be like is make man, these lights are really bright and the lights in my house are really bright and lights just kind of bother me, and I'm always wearing headphones even if I'm not listening to anything because the world is so loud. And then when I was having with Nico, I was talking about how much I've like memorized like SpongeBob like quotes, and I just kind of like say them to myself a lot, like over and over again. And Nico's like, "Yeah, it's echolalia, dude." And if you those who don't know, echolalia is like that compulsive like desire to repeat things or memorize things and mimic them as perfectly as you can, which is an autistic trait. So when Nico told me that the other day, I was like, interesting, because I really be just saying crazy stuff to myself all the time. But anyway, what about you, Cruz? Because I know you know we've talked a little bit, you know, in private that like, you know, this isn't something that you're all that, you know, intimately familiar with.
So a lot of my experience with disability comes from a third party perspective. So like I have an uncle who has been deaf from birth and cannot talk. And then I have family members who are very much on the spectrum and are definitely not what would be considered like high functioning on the spectrum. It's highly suspected I have ADHD, although I have not actually been diagnosed, so I'm not going to say yes or no to that. And then I have a friend that has muscular dystrophy, so I've seen her struggles just trying to navigate the world and having to have 24/7 care. And then I have family members where they've had strokes and have had muscular issues from that. They're not able to move or talk the way they used to. And then a lot of more mental disability. So a lot of bipolar, a lot of a couple schizophrenia examples within my family. And then for me personally, I didn't even really classify my thing as a disability until recently when other people started telling me that it is technically a disability, which is celiac disease.
Yeah.
And just before the podcast, I was like, let me look up like the classification. Like, how does the government actually see it? Yeah. And they say it is a disability, but only if it affects you for more than a year at a time. So, like, since I was a kid, I've always had stomach problems, and that was just kind of what people expected. And there's like, but it was like that was just kind of the norm. That people were just like, oh, he's got stomach problems, you know. Workplace pizza parties, I'd eat the pizza, I'd be very happy about it, I'd be a little sick afterwards, not sure why. And then as I've gotten older, now that I'm in my 30s, now it's like actually kind of debilitating. Like I ate a croissant the other day just because I really wanted a croissant, and I was out for like 3 hours. Like I had to lay down. I couldn't do anything, and then a couple days ago I had to call out of work because my gut was just on fire.
Right,
Uh,
right.
But I wanted to
So-
say, like, on top of like Cruz was naming all the people he knows, that's close to him. Disability, like, even if you're a healthy person, you know someone with a disability.
Yeah,
You
it's
can't not know someone with a disability. So,
Yeah.
I mean, unless
Okay.
you closet yourself in your house. But,
Right,
I mean,
Mhm.
but
Yeah. So, thanks for everyone for sharing. So, one of the things I wanted to bring up, and I'll probably bring up also on our re-ed going forward, was sort of the history, I guess, of how people with disabilities have been treated, going into the development of capitalism and going into, hopefully the future where, we won't be living under the thumb of capitalism. So one of the markers of human civilization that has, anthropologists, I know anthropology has a lot of problems, but this is one of the cases that I actually agree with them, is ancient, and I mean before history, like human remains discovered of people who it was very clear that these people had some kind of disability and basically was being taken care of by a family or community. And one of the cases I really means a lot to me was I'm pretty sure it was in the not the Euphrates, in Mesopotamia. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was there. Where basically the remains of a woman were found, and essentially based off of the pieces of skull that they found, it would have been evident that she would have had some kind of brain deformity, not be able to do basic what we call functions, everyday life skills or whatever for the time. And they noticed that when they were examining her teeth that she had a lot of dental caries. And basically the conclusion that they were able to come to was that this person basically was being fed dates like consistently by their community. And this person also died like in their late 30s.
Yeah.
Like that means that there is a person in this clan or tribe or group or whatever who did not contribute to the society in a productive way, but there were still people in the community who recognized this person for who they were and still gave them sweet treats just because they wanted to do that. And that is one of the unique things that we carry as humans, that we just have a natural empathy and care and love for people in our lives, despite what they could do for us or for society, for production, right? So, you know, so capitalism always gaslights us into believing that basically it's social Darwinism, it's the strongest to survive, and if you give in to the weak, you become weak. It's some very real right-wing Yahtzee kind of nonsense. So as society progressed, as white people colonized the world, basically from 1500 on to like 1870s, basically anyone who was disabled for the most part was removed from the population.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until 1900-ish where people started to maybe like maybe we shouldn't like do that. So basically that's, and particularly here in New York, is where you started to see institutions being created. You started seeing sort of the classic asylum or sanitarium style of living, where they basically, in this concentration camp, or basically where people were bringing their family members to these locations where they would live all together. But because there was never really any rules or laws or regulations amongst these places became very, very rife with abuse and neglect and straight up murder in some cases. And it was just really, really like decrepit. I first became aware of this when I started to basically work in the field when I became an aide. I'm just looking for somebody's name real quick so I can talk about this. I'll find it at some point. But basically, what happened was in the 30s, there was a particular campus in New York called Passaic. And Wasaic, if you want to get an idea of basically what it was like, there are videos. I would highly, highly, highly put a trigger warning on this, where basically, Lumpy, you probably remember the name of the reporter, but I cannot find his name all of a sudden. So like, I'm struggling here, but basically, there was a reporter. He's still active today. He's like a right winger on Fox News now. I think it's Geraldo something.
Oh, Rivera. Yeah, I'm sorry. You were saying Geraldo Rivera.
Thank you.
That is
So
who it is.
basically, Geraldo Rivera was able to sneak a camera crew into Passaic in the, I think basically in the 70s, and recorded essentially like Holocaust-esque environment, like dead people like in the corner, you know, whatever American Horror Story nightmare you can think of. That's what was happening. So he basically leaked it. Probably the only good thing Gerardo ever actually did. And basically, the state in New York was forced to react. So they decided and developed an organization called the Office for the Protection of People with Disabilities, OPWDD. And that basically in New York and most states now copy the same kind of, you know, format where basically they create all these laws, anti-abuse laws, and neglect for people with disabilities. So what happened particularly in New York is they started to rich people in particular who didn't want their kids to go into places like Wasaic began to say, let's buy houses and put our kids in those houses and hire private staff to take care of them. So as the state got involved, this sort of new development started to happen. Now, I'm going to preface this with this. This is not how I feel. This is not my opinion. This is just something that I've heard some people say. I don't agree with it. We're on the same page now, right? So basically, what started to happen was the state started enrolling these people into these group home environments. And what essentially started to happen was because these people were on Medicare and Medicaid, the organizations basically figured out that they could get a kickback from the state if they can show progress in skills and vocational skills that were deemed appropriate for these people in basically biannual or bi-yearly meetings. And as long as the documentation showed to be correct, the organizations were getting a kickback from the state from keeping these people alive. Now, again, this is something I've heard. This is not representative of what I feel or what I think or what I agree with. But basically, somebody down the line figured out that it was more profitable to keep these people alive rather than exterminate them or keep them in asylums. And that's sort of where we are now, where capitalism is so disgusting that it puts people, as I've heard described by other people that are not me, prisons with a smiley face sticker on it. And it really hasn't changed all that much.
Can I get into the disabled people as a commodity part then? Because that like
Go for
goes
it.
right into it. So basically, like a month ago, someone was talking, and I'm like, we were talking about commodities, we were talking about something else totally, and then in my head, I was like, oh my god, disabled people are a commodity, like in this enclosed system. If you think about it, like I mean, a commodity is something that supposedly we think of like on the stock exchange or whatever. I just remember like growing up and hearing about commodities and like at first like I was even kind of like when I was like porkbacks are a commodity, like it was weird to me. And then I found out about slavery being a commodity, and that was really weird to me. But then I've been thinking about this, and I read a couple of things on it, and it really is, if you think of it as, I call it the healthcare industrial complex. I call it like a MIC. I
Mhm.
call it the hick. So I like it just it all runs off of disabled people. They don't want a cure. They don't find cures. They, because they want to keep this, because they do. And, like, you're like, how are they making money off it? But I mean, they get the money from this, from the state, from the government. And that's what Ivan was just saying, the kickback. So like this was, prisons with smiley faces, and
Yeah.
it's just like that is what we are. We like, even so, like there's people that are disabled at work that get into this, especially since ACA,
Yeah.
especially.
Yeah. There was a nurse that I used to know who was in a situation where, in these environments, because as Nico was saying, they follow the medical model. Every one of these people is a full code, which means if somebody goes into cardiac or respiratory arrest, you have to do everything in your medical power to keep them alive. Now, sounds good in theory, but I knew a nurse who was in a situation where they had to basically keep somebody alive who it would have been a mercy to kill them, to let them go. And I don't mean that because they're disabled, but because they were in the active process of suffering. They
Yep.
had debilitating conditions. They were unable to regulate their temperature. It was many breakthrough seizures, GI bleeds. Like, this person was for weeks suffering. And you wouldn't put a normal person through that. And this nurse got so frustrated and upset working in this environment, because it's like, what are we doing just so we can keep the documentation flowing? But this person is every day suffering, and it's just disgusting.
I just thought about an article that had come out. I pulled it up. It's from 2018, and it was Goldman Sachs. This was on CNBC. Goldman Sachs asks in biotech research report, is curing patients a sustainable business model?
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if any of you remember that.
Article.
And that's just what you're saying. It's like, that's what the people at the top, the business people, the actual investors, that's what they're asking. It's like, could we cure these things? Possibly, if we put all our effort behind curing it, but how does that affect the bottom line? How does that affect the stock prices if we do?
Yeah. And let's just say, like, Cuba, who lives under a different model, has come out with, vaccines against certain cancers and stuff like that. Like, they have actually done, like, they're, they do this work to actually cure things. Because under
So China has a diabetes.
Yeah.
Is it a cure or a vaccine? I can't remember.
But vaccine.
Vaccine. Okay.
Yeah. Or something like that. I never know what they call vaccines now, because it's like a preventative. I don't know. Like, it's something that
it does stuff for diabetes, but in the United States, under the capitalist model, we could never, because we make too much money selling people the materials that are needed to maintain life under diabetic care.
Diabetes is
huge, very lucrative industry.
Moneymaker. Even with the lowering of insulin, it's a huge moneymaker for them.
I'm in the process of sending you something, Lumpy. I know it's last minute, but I just got sent something from our lovely Aria, which is going to be really interesting to look at. While I do that, though, Nico, you have anything to say in particular?
I mean, when I hear these type of discussions, like, talking about being commodity, but also in a sense, always being lumpen in a very real way as well. Like, it reminds me of like the constant catch-22 that all disabled people have to deal with. Because it's a scenario where you are, because of the medical model, you are seen as a tragedy. So they either can profit off of your tragedy, or they will try to alleviate you because you are a tragedy, not because they want you to thrive.
Yeah.
You know? So it's definitely, it's like, no matter which way you look at it, it's a type of social oppression that a lot of people who, which I'm going to say this very bluntly, who are not disabled yet, do not understand. Because in the end, like I say it all the time, it is not if, it is when.
Yeah.
Especially under capitalism.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're going to face this problem. Like in the so like I talked about how, like, nurses, have a lot of petite bourgeois aspirations, and a lot of us work in bedside nursing because it pays really well, but it's a very physical job. And I've complained to all of you guys before where, like, I've pulled my back, or I've back. It's always the back, like pulling muscles or herniated discs and stuff, because you're lifting and moving people, bending up and down. And I know so many nurses, once they're in their 50s, knee replacements, hip replacements, carpal tunnel surgeries, like, and people don't want to retire because they make good money and need money to survive in capitalism. I know a nurse who's 69 years old who had bilateral knee surgery, had one hip surgery that she ignored her hip problem for 18 years, she told me. Finally got it done, but now her other one is starting to go. And it's like, but people, they keep working, keep making the money, until you drop dead, and these jumps, they don't care about you, because then you could be a patient right in the same rehab, and they'll make all kinds of money for you. Another thing I wanted to tie into this, and kind of with like our last podcast, we're talking about immigration. Again, not representative of how I feel or anything I believe in, but New York gets a lot of refugees from Central America, and I do suspect a lot of the chronic issues from Central America come from American experiments and bombs and chemical warfare that occurred when my parents were coming this way. So we get a lot of people with young people, I mean young, like our age, like massive strokes, debilitating disorders. And I've heard of companies that have basically started to take these people in for free, right? To basically placate the state, to get grants from the state. And I've heard my own coworkers, well, not my coworkers, because this is not me. I've heard nurses complain about nurses or patients basically taking up all the resources. And my thought is, one, these corporations they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart, right? So you don't think the corporations have figured out that when somebody with good insurance goes to the hospital, they're not going to run every goddamn test and scan and give you every pill and specialist to make up their money. Like, they know how to turn a profit. They've been doing this for decades. Like, and there's no sympathy here. Nothing is free under capitalism. They're always going to be making their money off of people. Or like Nika was saying, like, you're not disabled yet, and you won't be disabled yet if you get a full body scan. Only $15,000 charged to your insurance, whatever. They'll make their money back. Like, it is extremely lucrative business. So, Lumby, did you see what I sent you?
I have it. Give me like 1 more minute.
Okay,
I just
cool.
have to put it up.
All right, that's fine. It's fine.
Bye.
It's fine. So basically, like, we're talking a lot about capitalism, right? But like, what would a society under? Well, let me touch on this before we get there. So we've all seen a lot of people on, basically on the left or whatever, especially online, basically say that, like, the lumpen is not needed. There's no need to radicalize or work with people who are disabled. But Kollectiv is just a small example of basically how that's just not true, because our entire cadre is made up of people who are disabled, who have done excellent work, who have elevated Kollectiv to a position that Kollectiv was not going to be at. without you guys. So like, sure, individually you guys may have your own particular struggles, but it doesn't mean you're not good at something else. And even if you aren't good at something, doesn't mean you don't deserve, the same basic human rights that we're fighting for. But those who can like make propaganda, or who are artists or singers who can even like and repost something, like it matters. And so when you see a lot of these Twitter warriors, ICP goobers, like basically talk about like how it's just unnecessary and unneeded, it's just ignoring objective reality of the people that you're trying to win, especially in the states where the lumpen, both in terms of disabled and criminal or unemployed, will be the ones who are mainly on the front lines in some kind of capacity.
Yeah, I like to say that I am only disabled in capitalism, like,
Yeah.
because I just can't make capitalist money anymore, so they discarded me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
all right, let me add this to the stage. I don't know how the writing, if it's going to be too small to see.
No, I'm gonna read it. So
Okay.
Aria sent us some stuff just now. Thanks, Aria. Where basically a lot of our figures that we look up to and have read about have had some kind of disability. So Che Guevara was an Argentinian revolution who played a role in the Cuban Revolution. He was an insurgent commander, military strategist who used guerrilla warfare. Che had chronic asthma and was frequently bedridden, which was when he would spend his time reading and educating himself. He believed that through the education, people could learn to fight all forms of authority. And then he went on to liberate the entire nation. I mean, like,
Yeah.
that right there. Karl Marx, influential German revolutionary socialist and writer who made major contributions to economics and philosophy. He had pneumonia, liver problems, and chronic and incapacitating skin conditions, which may have been hereditaritis. I cannot read. As a nurse, I cannot read Latin, which often interrupted his work. Marx is best known for writing the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. Right there, the main dude, and all these white communists always glaze up, like, had issues. And I want to add too, so like, Karl Marx was alcoholic. That's a disability. This is alcoholism.
Yeah.
Drug addiction is a disease. Like, Rosa Luxemburg, Polish
Yeah.
political radical, intellectual, and author. She played a role in founding the Communist Party of Germany. Luxemburg had a congenital bone condition and impacted her hips and legs, making walking difficult. She advocated a path to socialism through revolutionary mass action, intersectionality, solidarity to overthrow capitalism. So don't ever let these Twitter warriors tell you that disabled people are just like not like involved in revolutionary struggle. They are the ones who are. So that's just
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nico.
I mean, no, I was gonna say, like, I think able-bodied people in a lot of ways don't realize, or neurotypical people don't realize, that disabled people understand the material conditions in a real way. They have to live it every single day of their lives because they're either completely disconnected from it or constantly affected by the material conditions.
Yeah.
And you need those people. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. when I worked as an aide, with the developmentally disabled, like that is exactly something that I came to the conclusion that, like, these people aren't stupid, and like, people communicate differently. They have their own behaviors. They have their own ways that they exist in their own mind, but they're not stupid.
Yeah.
And they've lived this life their entire life. Like, I worked with some guys who were. I basically worked in the bad house. I worked in the one that nobody wanted to go to because there's always aggression and whatever. But over time and through teamwork and just proximity, we understood the needs of these individual people and began to understand that, like, no, a lot of these guys have trauma and their own emotional issues, even if they can't communicate with us. Like, especially when you live in a situation like that where you see staff come and go your entire life. And it's like, I learned very quickly a lot of the behaviors and aggression was people basically being like, I'm going to see if you can handle me. And like, sure, it's toxic and not good and sometimes dangerous, but like, what is the difference between doing that and neurotypical people pushing loved ones away when they feel vulnerable? What's the difference between me ignoring you or not answering your text versus me punching you because I can't control my my impulses as well as you can. Like, it's the same thing. It's the same human behavior. It's just expressed differently. But yeah, I realized very clearly these people have lived this life their entire life.
Yeah.
You know, they learned that, like, well, nobody cares about me, so if I scream and throw myself on the floor, you'll give me cookies, because cookies is the only thing I have to look forward to. But then when you encounter somebody, you know, who is going to basically work through those maladaptive behaviors with you, you very quickly they responded so well to that. Like, I used to work with this one guy again, and he was like the bad guy. Like, no one ever wanted to work with him. And just through, like, and I'm not saying I never got frustrated at him, believe me, but like, through working with him for years, I was just able to get him to a position where, like, I realized that he just wanted, like all of us, he just wanted some kind of attention. And you begin to make, instead of giving negative attention, you would get positive attention. Like, he really wanted to always clean his room and show how nice his room was and stuff. And maybe he didn't do a great job, but giving somebody that opportunity and to make them feel good went so much farther than, like, oh, well, no one's paying attention to me right now, so I'm just going to start throwing stuff and smacking people, because then at least you're acknowledging that I exist, you know?
Did you
But-
guys learn about Helen Keller in school? Like, was that like
Yes.
kind of.
something you
I
learned about?
don't really remember,
Okay,
to be honest.
like I mean, I know she has like some ties to, you know, some of the feminists that were a little eugenics, but I don't think that she was. I don't think she was a bad socialist or anything. But I mean, think of that. Like, think of that story. We're not told that she ends up becoming a socialist. She becomes a socialist because she realizes, you know what I mean? Like that is what will be good for me, you know, for people like me, you know.
Mhm.
And that is not what you are taught about her. You're taught about overcoming adversity and
Yep.
you know, like being strong and just pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. You know, that was
Yeah.
what the lesson was, and that is not what I think Helen Keller would want the lesson to be.
Yeah, education under the capitalist system loves leaving out those little details of this person was a socialist and they were advocating for liberation of all people, not just pulling themselves up.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
It goes back to the medical model versus the social model. The medical model is highly individualistic. That's why we're taught in our society that Helen Keller basically pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, instead of focusing on the fact that Helen Keller recognized that society had barriers that made existing under a capitalist society harder, like almost impossible being an impaired person. And thus socialism was the answer to breaking down those barriers.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Aria pointed out something here that I want to talk about too. People need to quit using incorrect liberalism masquerading as claims of ableism as a way to disrupt communist work. Learn about what ableism is and what it's not. We don't want to be coddled. So yeah, basically there was a TikTok live the other day where one of the homies basically said you should read XYZ. I don't know what it was. And basically, a communist who's more liberal than communist came in and said, saying to read is ableist. Now, here's the thing. It's ableist to mock and shame people for not being able to read. But it's also ableist to coddle people who know that they can't read. Like, illiterate people aren't stupid. Do you think people in the lithium mines who can't read don't know that they can't read? Like, that's something we take for granted so much in the West, in the United States, is that we have the ability to do that. My father had the equivalent of probably less so, but he claims a 6th grade education. I to this day I'm not sure how much homie actually really knows how to read in either English or Spanish. And like, it's so hard to understand, but really think about this. It is a rudimentary example, but imagine you're driving on the highway and you see the highway signs, exit whatever to Kansas City, I don't know. Now imagine that was just like in a completely different language, right? Like, not a Latin based language, let's say it's in Arabic. You're gonna be like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
This could mean anything. That's what it's like. Now imagine that, but everywhere, and you can't escape it. And it's not until you're taught to read, and hopefully you have good comrades that should teach you how to read, that will alleviate that. And kind of bringing the criticism full circle, right? Like it also applies to us that if we know somebody in our circles who maybe doesn't have the strongest reading ability, because in America, people are taught to read and write just enough to basically work. But if
Yeah.
a lot of times when we talk about like people don't understand theory or don't understand certain essays or whatever, we shouldn't shame them and we shouldn't step away from them. We should acknowledge that like maybe so and so actually really is struggling to understand this, and we should take the time to help them understand, because just because you can read doesn't mean you comprehend.
Yeah.
So on the other hand of that, again, we shouldn't be coddling people when we're telling people that you should read X, Y, and Z. It's not to shame or make fun of them, but also we need to create an environment that's more inviting for if that person that we're saying you should read X, Y, and Z should be comfortable enough to say, but maybe I don't know how.
Yeah.
Or
Can you
maybe
help
I'm
me?
not going to understand that. And that's why being vulnerable is so important in these spaces. We need to create that environment so we can be like, you know what? Yeah, come to the Discord and we'll do it with you.
Yeah. One of the stories about Lennon, like one of the outside stories, not something he wrote on himself, but someone wrote about him, was he went around. I mean, famously, he went around and taught, had people read Marx and, did all this stuff. But, he'd come across people and they'd be like, we don't know how to read. And he'd sit down and teach them how to read and read to them as he was teaching them Marx. Like that's what he
Mhm.
did. That's how he taught all these peasants how to read, was reading Marx. So like I know it drives Asha all wild that like
Yeah.
someone would say like you know you can't say that, or like I have trouble reading, because especially in nowadays, and like this is another thing. I mean, for, like, being disabled, one of the things I was gonna talk about and I'll get into is, like, how you can get involved and stuff, but, like, we have it a little bit better than than, like, 100 years ago, you know what I mean? Like, we
Yeah.
have
Mhm.
technology to help us. We have books on tape. We have, we have movies and, all different ways of getting it and understanding it. And we have the ability to be sitting here on YouTube right now talking about it, where everyone had to write it down before. They didn't have the capability of putting this out for people to hear if they're struggling with reading and comprehending. And to your point, Ivan, I think it was like about 5 years ago. It was the Department of Education who put out that 52% of Americans, 52%,
Mm-hmm.
don't have beyond a 6th grade level or lower.
Yeah.
So, like, you're
Yeah.
missing all that extra comprehension skills and stuff, and that's not on you. That is not on you until you realize it. You can correct that. You can,
I
you
want,
can get help for that, but
I want to
yeah.
add on to that for just one little detail, because in that same piece where they're talking about the average, sort of the 6th grade reading level, right?
Yeah.
The average news article written within the United States is written at an 11th grade reading level.
Yeah.
So there is a good chunk of our population here in the United States that cannot read the news and fully understand it. It is our job as revolutionaries to educate and do everything within our power to ensure that people do understand it and get the help they need.
Yeah.
No matter how long that takes, even if you're getting frustrated, like things get frustrating sometimes, but it's our job to do that.
Yeah, no,
Help
I
each
remember having a conversation about this, like these kind of situations. Like it is the ableism comes in when you do not have access to the information. Whether
Yeah.
it's not the person telling you that the information exists, it is not the person trying to share the information with you that is being ableist. And frankly, I think it is harmful to go around and throw around the term being ableist to anyone, because it hampers the struggle that we deal with every single day. I like to use the example of sometimes people focus on words and language usage a lot more than actually like breaking down barriers. Imagine there's an org who creates wheelchairs, and they are really focused on making sure everyone knows that you use the term wheelchair user. But instead of focusing, they use the term wheelchair user. They tell everybody that's what you're supposed to use. You're not supposed to use anything else. But then you go to the org's location and the entrance is not wheelchair accessible.
Yeah.
Like that's a great example. Like the focus should be on actually giving people access versus focusing on terminology all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's
Especially-
performative at that point.
Yeah, it is. It is. And especially like, how do I say this appropriately? Working in the environments that I did with guys, men who could communicate to each other, the things they would say to each other when they were mad at each other, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, people are people, humans are humans, and it doesn't make, if someone is, somebody who, is disabled, let's say, like they're using a slur, right, towards each other, like, yeah, I'm gonna be like, hey, homie, don't do that. But like, what's more important is the care and the removal of barriers rather than policing like the language that people particularly use all the time. And it would be super different, right, if like you are not, if you're going running around, using the R slur, or you are mocking people, using wheelchairs. But don't be jumping into these TikTok lives being like, person who uses a wheelchair, instead of making sure your local organization or your local cafe or whatever has, a ramp.
I've dealt with that personally recently. Just as a small little anecdote in my personal workplace, I work at a library, for those that don't know. And the way my library is set up, there's an old building that was built in like the late 1800s, and then a newer building, more contemporary, built I think the 70s. And a lot of that is there's a lot of like rental space within it, but there's also the library. But recently they took out a lot of the first floor of the library and moved it all to the old building. Okay. Because they want to rent it out for like weddings and things like that, because it's really pretty glass building. And in the upper management's worldview, they want everyone that's going to use the library to eventually start using the old building's entrances and not the new building. That way they can have weddings during the day. The problem is the wheelchair ramp is part of the new building. There is no wheelchair ramp part of the old building. And we have been bringing this up constantly. Like, you are actively taking away library access to someone that there's no way in that building without going through there. And every time they pull out a budget, they're like, oh, we're going to build this and this and this. Not once does it include a new wheelchair ramp on that old building to accomplish the things they want to do. And it's those people, they do not think about the disabled people within our communities. And unless you like constantly bring it up or start protesting or like really get in their face and get aggressive about it, they won't listen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I had a similar experience with my current workplace, which I work at a museum. I spent the almost 2 years I've been working at the museum, telling basically customers, every single one that came in, and was like, you don't have automatic doors. I'm like, file a complaint.
Yeah.
I was like, I work here, but file a complaint. I try to tell them all the time that they need to have automatic doors, and they won't install them. So I need you, the person that basically funds them, to tell them, give us automatic doors. And like 3 months ago, we finally got them.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't have taken that long. The building has been around since 1992, and they are just now getting automatic doors.
Yeah, and
automatic doors were like a thing
common
since the 90s.
Yeah.
Way before that.
Yeah.
Did you want to go through your slides? Because I can pull them. I have them right here if you want to like just talk through them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, let's just do that quickly. Go through that. Hold on. Nico gave me a bunch of slides to go through. Okay.
I mean, most of them are going to cover the same thing. I just really like when I decided to, was invited to come up onto this live. I really urge anyone who is a communist or a comrade to really learn about the medical model versus the social model. As this picture shows, and the other pictures will show, the medical model makes it to where the individual is the problem. It's about their weaknesses and basically what strain they put on to our society. Whereas the social model, which basically changes the term for what disability is, because for the medical model, disability is always going to be the impairment. Basically, like for me, my spina bifida, my neurodivergency. But the social model realizes that the society around us, i.e. capitalism, is what creates the barriers that is actually disabling. And this is not to say that, you can't experience pain or, suffer in some manner with your impairment. But in the end, if society fundamentally changed and took away those barriers, you would be able to actually find ways to deal with those impairments in a way that's fruitful and helpful for you. So it's about empowerment. It is about changing the way people think, destigmatizing disability. And it's about, making sure that we recognize that the barriers are around us. The problem isn't the person who is disabled. And basically, these are just different like visual and examples of that type of those different models and how they function.
I like that one. I can read that one.
And this is great because everyone, learns a little different.
Yeah, everyone likes it. Like
works.
My favorite was this one. This is how I'm.
That's also my favorite.
I like that one too. It's all
nice.
So basically that, and one thing that I wanted to add in was we're going to be talking about the lumpen, so a little bit expanded from the disability on Wednesday's show. Also, Aria was supposed to be up here tonight, but not feeling well. Or disabilities, so so she couldn't make it, and we missed her, but she's been in the comments and been helping from the back end of it and sending us stuff. So I'm gonna touch a little bit on like how you can like if you're disabled. I think like anyone here like kind of understands because obviously we are involved, like, but it's really like just finding. You first find the community. Sometimes like what it took for me was to find my community of the Darkham's people, and then realizing that wasn't getting me anywhere because no one was there. So I expanded it to like chronically ill because Darkham's is a rare disease. So I expanded it, and then at that point, I found ways that I could organize, ways I could help because I was kind of like had no way to turn. You know what I mean? So it really is just getting involved and asking. Because like if you think of like any mutual aid group, anything like that, all you have to do is like, you know what, I can't, do this part, but they have to like put things together. They put bags together. Might be able to drive them around or something. You know what? Like there's different things you can do. So just always ask the orgs around you if you're interested in getting involved. Because they will find a place.
Cool beans. All right. I think we touched on a lot today. I know that maybe some people might have expected more of like what is it going to look like under socialism? A lot of things that we don't know what's going to look like at socialism. But if you look at the models that Nico was posting, I think that gives a very concrete idea of what society would look like for those who are disabled under capitalism. Maybe even those who are disabled under socialism, that they can live a life as free as many barriers as possible.
Yeah.
Anyone have any final thoughts?
Final thoughts.
Let's
Anybody?
make life as easy for each other as we can. That's all we can. That's what we're fighting for. That's what we need to do.
That's what we're trying to do, homies. Trying to make things easy. And I'm sorry I scared you with the music earlier, Cruz. That was.
If anyone watching probably saw me like, look, I was like, am I hearing?
I thought it was my computer. I thought it was me. I was like, what did I pack?
I'm like looking at my phone. I'm looking at my browser. I was like, did I open something? What is happening?
No. I remember the lo-fi thing now. This is Ivan likes to come in with the lo-fi.
And I didn't come in with the lo-fi, so you know. But anyway,
I was like, it's time to wrap it up.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thanks, Lumpy, as always. Thank you, Nico, for coming up the first time. It was a lot of fun having you on. I would say I would love to have you back on, but you're a cadre, so if I tell you to come on, you kind of have to do it.
Yeah.
You know, so you know that's just the thing. You know, you're on the panel with two of your bosses, so you know it's just kind of.
Is that how this works?
Yes. Kidnap all the talents. Yeah, basically, you know, we all have to take accountability and also recognize our own bias when it comes to just living with disabilities and meeting other people with disabilities. And if you see anybody on Twitter saying all this nonsense, I'm not going to promote adventurism, but you got the idea. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Lumpy, play us out.
All right. Trumpet of the world, unite.